Join the Shot Talk Patreon at patreon.com/shottalk. You'll get access to bonus content, Q&A opportunities for future guests, and more. Thanks and enjoy.
As soon as I got my hands on Flash, like I was saying, everybody in animation wants to do their own stuff. When Flash came along, we could. But before that, it was, you needed pencil and paper and, stacks of paper, physical space, cameras, lights.
Hey guys, doing something a little different today. We're talking with Adam Phillips, legendary Flash animator who now uses Toon Boom from what we just talked about, Adam Phillips. And Adam, thanks so much for being on the show, dude.
No problem.
Yeah, I was just saying how we've known each other on the Newgrounds internet, but not actually had a chance to talk person to person like this, which is kind of exciting for me because been following your stuff forever, dude. So.
Right, yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah. It's funny, you get to know these people and you feel like you know them by their username, the look of their username and their avatar, but it's the first time we've actually spoken face to face.
I thought you were hairier all around here just from your Bitey cartoon character.
Oh yeah.
No, but
Bitey persona.
No, but yeah, I mean, dude. So we were just talking that I know Joe Bowers and I did bring up when we had our coming ups on Flash and Newgrounds in general on the internet. The Bitey series was a pretty monumental thing, and I remember we were all just fucking around with like Sonic the Hedgehog versus Mario, sprite animations, and then you came along and showed that this can be filmic, this can be sort of a little bit more sophisticated, right? So, and I guess at the time we didn't realize that you actually had a background with Disney Australia, is where you had a lot of that animation training, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it kind of raised a few eyebrows on Newgrounds back in the day. I remember people getting their hackles up a bit because what they saw as a professional coming in to a kind of like a Mavericks domain.
You say get their hackles up. Is that like get annoyed or like?
Yeah, when dogs get angry and their
okay,
their hair comes. I guess isn't that what you say?
I hadn't heard that expression. It must be an Australian.
Yeah, I mean, get your back up.
Yeah, maybe I'm uncultured. Yeah. I don't know, but that's funny. No, that's funny because I never saw any of that negativity. All I ever saw was like, holy shit, dude, like, how did you do that? Like, that's mostly what I saw anyways, but...
Well, as the creator, you know what it's like. You focus on the negative stuff and you kind of think that's the general feeling. But yes, for many years I was like, I wonder, should I be doing this? And I talked about it with Tom and he encouraged me to keep submitting, don't read the comments, man.
Yeah, no. Even back then, right? That's the old adage. That's even more true, I think, now than ever before.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a bit of drama on Twitter this morning that I saw. Some dude posted a joke, and all the pitchforks came out. I was like, I tweeted at the guy and said, subtlety's a double-edged sword because you make some kind of subtle joke, and people don't get it. They think you're serious, and you're in trouble.
Yeah,
will kick off and ruin your life. So
yeah, that's really rough. I think for I think artists and people who are just trying to get a laugh out of somebody, and the last thing you want to do is to piss somebody off with on that like serious level. I mean, it's kind of fun to troll a little bit, I think, as artists, but like when people really like look like their life is ruined, it's like, oh geez, dude, like what's going on there?
I was just joking. Damn, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Nah, it's kind of weird now because now it feels like that turns into, you see stories about people like losing their jobs and like, oh my God, somebody said a joke about this and they get fired.
Yeah, like that woman on the plane that time a few years back. I forget what her name was, but yeah, she just had to disappear from Twitter because before she landed, she made the joke before she boarded.
Yeah.
And then by the time she got off the plane, like there was like a hashtag trending like when she's landing.
Oh my God.
So that was like...
Well, I'm curious because like your stuff has always been, I mean, you've created your own little universe and you have your own little character. So like I'm not imagining that people have ever had a serious social problem or anything with the stuff that you're doing. You're saying it's more like people getting jealous maybe or something, that you could do all that stuff.
I don't want to say jealousy. I think it's just, people feel a bit threatened when, they think, because Newgrounds is very kind of, it is a domain of the maverick, and it's like, anybody can do this stuff, and I've got a copy of Flash and a computer, and, I'm allowed to, make films, where it was so prohibitive back when I was a kid. Like when I first started at Disney, I was 23 years old. There was no avenue for animators apart from using paper and flip books in school and stuff.
But there's no way to put them out there for everybody.
Yeah, and if everybody it was in my group when we started Disney, there was a group of 8, and everybody in that group had their ideas. Everybody who works in animation has their own ideas. And so, the first thing you do when you get a job in animation is start thinking, I'm going to make my movie and I'm going to make, characters. And, Brackenwood kind of started way back then when I first was getting those ideas as a new animator. And so, I mean, not Brackenwood as it is now, but the first ideas of a forest world and, little creatures and characters are completely different to what it is now. But yeah, so back then,
when you say,
I remember doing...
Sorry, when you say back then, you guys are actually working for Disney at this point? You're talking about school or like...
No, I'm talking when I was working for Disney. Okay. When I got my first job with Disney, because I didn't have any... Animation was not on my radar at all. I had no idea that Disney was in Australia. I was just drawing. I was just making comics. I wanted to be the next, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Eastman and Laird guy.
Totally.
Guys. But yeah, and that's what I did in my free time. And when I heard there was jobs going at Disney, I sent them a bunch of comic panels that I had done, and that's how I got the job.
That's great.
Yeah,
so it was you got hired for draftsmanship skills, and then that turned into motion. Like you didn't demonstrate that you knew how to do motion.
Well, not initially. When you send them the test, when I sent them the kind of submission with my comic panels and stuff, then they called me in for an in-house test, which was the in-house. Well, there was a second round of testing by mail where they sent you a bunch of scenarios written in text, and they said, Goofy's pulling a rope, make it funny. Make an illustration, make 2 panels or something of Goofy pulling a rope and make it funny. So I sent there was Goofy pulling a rope, and then the next panel was the kind of follow through or the after shot of the rope having already been pulled, and Mickey Mouse was being pulled through the shot on the other end of the rope. So, and did some silly stuff like that. Do a Mickey Mouse with a wheelbarrow and make that funny. And so it was him pushing a wheelbarrow up a hill, and then the next panel was just him on the ground with the dirt all over him and the wheelbarrow on its side. So just kind of simple stuff like that, but just to demonstrate that you can, try and make something funny or put character or a little story into a simple idea. So then I was called in for the... Sorry?
Oh, no, so like a little gag test or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the next test was, okay, you passed that round, come into the studio for an in-betweening test. And I didn't even know what in-betweening was. And so sat down, and she gave me 2 drawings, or she gave me a scene folder with like 5 keys in it or something, and said, just do as many in-betweens. This is how in-betweens work. You've got these 2 keys. This is a light box. Put your 2 drawings. Here's where the switch is on the light box, and put a clean sheet of paper over the top and do the in-between. And that was the in-house test. So at the end of that, like she said, we'll give you an hour, I think it was. And then she said, came back after an hour and said, how many drawings have you done? It's like testing you for your speed already on your very first day.
Yeah.
And and that's how they whittle it down from like 3,000 applicants to 8 positions.
Now, I'm guessing before that you had messed around on your own, like you're saying, with note cards and little experiments on your own with animation.
Not really.
Not really.
Not really. Huh. No, animation was so far out of my mind. Like when I was a kid, I remember drawing Pinocchio. I had a pillow, like I was, when I was a toddler, I had a pillow that had Disney characters all over it. And I remember putting a piece of paper on the pillow and tracing Pinocchio and the pencil pushing through the paper and making holes in it, tearing up the paper because I was trying to trace Pinocchio. But apart from that, there was like, of course, we all grew up seeing movies of Disney and stuff, but I had never dreamed that I would be working for the company, let alone in Australia. Like, I assumed all that was on another planet.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's cool that it's almost like you went in for maybe one thing and they sort of were like, oh, well, here, we're going to toss this at you, and then it ends up that you caught it, and all of a sudden, like you said, you were whittled down from those, I guess, however many thousand you said, to the 8 people, which is pretty crazy. And I know that, what's his name? Bernard Derriman, I think, was in that group, because that's another guy.
He was in the group.
Yeah.
He was in the group before me.
Okay.
So he'd already been at Disney for 6 months before I applied. So they were taking in a group of 8 every 6 months.
I gotcha.
So actually, when I applied, they said, "Oh, you've just missed the group of 6 months. If you'd been like 2 days earlier, you would have got in." And so that was Bernard's group, apparently. Bernard and Jeanette, my partner, she started at Disney 6 months before me too. She might have been, no, she was in Bernard's group. Yeah.
That's great, man. Yeah, I know. That's another guy who sort of was pretty influential with his Argent Poopy and what's the one? The bunny rabbit singing "Everybody Else Has Had More Sex Than Me." Yeah, like just really appealing. Just really fun.
Yeah, because he and I are still working together too. So it was like we've been. We've known each other since 1993, which is when I started at Disney. But we kind of discovered Flash together, and we would show each other our Flash movies and give each other feedback and criticism. And he's like a proper student of film. He's a proper filmmaker now. He's like supervising director at Bob's Burgers, and he's made short films and written, he gives me notes on everything that I do. So if I even the trailer that I made recently the other day for the game, I sent it to him and said, "What do you think?" And he gave me a couple of notes on it. So I didn't release it until I took care of those notes.
Well, that's great. Yeah, no, it's nice to have those people that like you've been through so much, and you know they're looking out for you. Like in terms of like trust level and everything. That's cool, man. So was Disney using Flash, or how did you guys end up messing around with that particular program?
No, it was because Disney was pencil and paper for the whole time that I was there. Okay. That was 11 years, and I left at the end of 2004. So I did a little bit of freelance work for them in 2005, and then the studio closed in 2006.
Oh wow!
So they were using paper, pencils, traditional animation. The only digital aspect of the animation was the ink and paint side of things, where they would vectorize the drawings, scan and vectorize the drawings, and then digitally paint them. The other digital aspect, they just started to transition their backgrounds department to digital, and so they were using Corel Painter back then, and all the traditional artists, the traditional background artists, proper paint people, which is a little bit alien to me, the whole paint side of traditional media, because all my stuff is comic book art, black and white ink and stuff. So you were so that was Goofy Movie was the first big project that they threw you on, or you mean the first? Well, the project they were working on when I joined the studio was Return of Jafar, so Aladdin 2, and that's when the studio was starting to be considered by the higher ups to be a sequel studio rather than a television studio, because we were mostly a television studio, and the studio was called Walt Disney Television Animation, and so we did Goof Troop and Timon and Pumbaa TV show, and Jungle Cubs, and Gargoyles, and
fun, yeah.
What was the Yes, and a bunch of others, like television versions of these.
Yeah, I just saw
properties.
Not less than 2 weeks ago, I finally saw an episode of Gargoyles. I was really impressed that that was on television on that level of polish. It really, granted, it was the first episode, so I'm sure they were putting their best foot forward. But I thought, wow, that's very, very different in a good way. So that was pretty exciting to look at.
I remember I was just starting. I just was trying out for animation at that point when they were doing Gargoyles. So my first scene on Gargoyles was I forget the lead character's name. Goliath.
Yes.
Yeah, he was attacking a news helicopter, and he had they said have him fly up into shot, and the layout had him the poses of him coming into shot and then attacking the helicopter. So that was my first scene of Goliath attacking a helicopter. It was the coolest thing to do as an animation. Yeah, trying out for an animation job. But I didn't get into animation straight away, so I went to effects.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because at what point did you transition? Because it sounds like you were doing character work initially, and then at what point did you decide that was going to be your forte more than anything? Like,
well, it's back then the animators did their own effects, because being a television studio, if you have a character being electrocuted or something, you do the character being and then you have the light, then you do the lightning effects. And not all animators are great at effects animation. They don't really have that sense of what some do, some really do. And one guy in particular, Alex Staterman, was really good at effects animation, and because he'd done it with other studios. He's from Germany, so he'd worked through Europe in other, he had a bit more of a career, and and he was only, a year older than me, I think, so he was still quite young, and that studio asked him to set up an effects department. So I was his first recruit, so that's why I kind of went from character animation before I'd even got a job in character animation. I actually did get into the character animation training program by trying out and doing test scenes and stuff. So I had got my foot in the door with animation, and then he and I were kind of starting to be friends and stuff socially, and so he asked me if I wanted to try out for the effects department. So I did a few scenes, and that's where I stayed. And whenever there was work for effects was thin on the ground, I'd go back and do some work I did a couple of Timon and Pumbaa scenes in Lion King 2, I think. I did a couple of Timon and Pumbaa scenes. I was on the Timon and Pumbaa team in the off time.
Now you have a pretty distinct style with your own personal stuff. Was trying to sort of match the Disney style or staying on model, was that something that was a little bit of a trick for you? Like, yeah,
it always has been. And I would, and even now, if someone gives me model sheets and says animate this, and they're really strict with their model, I need a lot of tweaking and fixing up time before it can go to cleanup,
Sure.
So it's I think the drawings look great, but then they say, maybe the drawings do look great, but they're not on model, man.
I gotcha.
So I did have a bit of trouble with character stuff in that way, but I got by. I wasn't the best model guy, but I could animate.
I was gonna say, I'm sure the motion did a lot in terms of because that's half the battle, is getting it to move appealingly. Yeah.
And that's the reason that I have a lot of action in my animation. Is subtlety is not great. If I have to do a character acting, I don't really do that much. I do it with a facial expression. I don't do it with subtle, beautiful animation. I'm not a James Baxter or
well, that's what I think made you pop so much with the Newgrounds community, because that's there's a lot of like young male energy that we all thought that was so mind-blowing and so fucking cool when we saw I think it was Joe that was saying that there was actual camera movement and sort of this kinetic energy that for us it's like we all wanted to sort of try to do something like that. So that's
that was being from the effects department, one of the first things, and I'm only thinking of this now. I have never considered this as the root of that kind of thing, but one of the first scenes that Alex did, my effects mentor back in the day. One of the first things that I saw him do that never made it into Aladdin, I think it was Return of Jafar. No, not Return of Jafar, and the King of Thieves was the Aladdin 3. It was about Aladdin and his dad. Yeah, he did this animated background, which blew my mind. And it was like he'd done the topography of the landscape and had that coming towards camera, and that just blew me away. So I thought, as soon as I got my hands on Flash, like I was saying, everybody in animation wants to do their own stuff. When Flash came along, we could. But before that, it was, you needed pencil and paper and stacks of paper, physical space, cameras, lights. When I discovered Flash, I instantly wanted to do all that kind of stuff. So the animated background, when I made the UU, I started planning those shots with a horizon line and a vanishing point that was just moving around the background. And I knew I wanted to...
And sort of track that, right?
Yeah. Always keeping track of the vanishing point and where everything is moving on every single frame.
Oh my God.
And that was, there was a couple of hundred frames in that sequence.
Oh my God, dude.
At 25 FPS, I think it was. And that's why the background in those sequences are so sparse on detail. It's just grass, basically. Mm-hmm. And then when I wanted to get a bit creative, I was putting in rivers and cliffs and stuff going past. But you pause any of those and it's just so quick.
Yeah.
You pause any of those and it's so flat colored. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. No, I was gonna say it's just like forms that you're feeling fly by, right? Like for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you would find there's like the vanishing point, and then everything would sort of like you would try to draw it in correct perspective as it was moving back and forth, and traversing and wiggling. That's crazy, dude. That's really cool.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. No. And then so I know that you then transitioned from Flash, and now I know you're doing more Toon Boom stuff. I know these days where.
Yeah, I mean, there came a point, and there probably comes a point in most Flash animators' work when you realize that the software just isn't coping because you're trying to do bigger and bigger and bigger things. And for me, I never used Photoshop, and I never was, like I said, I wasn't a paint guy. So vector for me was a really comfortable format to work in. So the more detail I was putting into those backgrounds, the more the program was struggling. So I just found myself, looking around, not really actively looking around for alternatives. And in fact, Toon Boom sent me a free copy back before I even knew what Toon Boom was. And it was like Toon Boom Studio 3 or something. And they said, here, try this out, let us know what you think. And it was just like, alien interface to me. And I was just like, I just want to do this in Flash. How do I do this in Flash? So I dropped it for several years, and then
a lot of people did. I know they sent that
Yeah.
software out to a lot of Newgrounders, and a lot of us just thought this seems too insurmountable to figure out, and we were all just so used to how quick Flash was. But I did sit down and figure it out, and I was like, oh, this is actually super powerful once you give it a crack. Yeah.
Yeah, the big strength, I think, and the thing that made me switch ultimately was the fact that the video export was what we all didn't know we needed, because exporting something really complex to the SWF format and running it in the browser is, it'll struggle when you've got blur, gradients, high detail, all that sort of stuff, and do all that stuff frame by frame with camera moves. The SWF and playing that in the browser is of course going to struggle. So exporting to video from Flash was a bit of a tug of war back then too. As soon as you do something in Toon Boom, it doesn't really matter how you did it. Once you export it to video, you realize that was a really painless process, is putting stuff on video.
Like it just basically rasterizes it and turns it into just a video file versus actual like vector info, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's still a vector drawing program, so you can manipulate the vectors the same way you would in Flash, and it's got all the same tools and everything, but it rasterizes everything. So your scale. The great thing is you can, like Flash, you can make a really small movie and then scale it up for export.
Let me ask you, what do you think, having studio experience, how do you think that sort of, I mean, obviously visually, it's impacted what your independent stuff, but in terms of process and I don't know, maybe just sort of like how you even organize your stuff, does that help you with your personal stuff? Like having seen how an actual studio does it and then doing it yourself on like a homemade scale, right? Like, are there things that you borrowed that you found really useful? Like,
I think so. Yeah. The thing that one of the most natural things in a traditional animation is being able to turn the disc and draw, at any angle.
Okay.
So Flash was a struggle in that way that you couldn't rotate the workspace initially, and so Toon Boom had that. And that's one of the things that made me go, just get all excited that, something's going my way.
Yeah.
But I think it's also the reason that working in a studio is also the reason that I don't know if everybody did this, but gravitated towards the use of scenes instead of just doing it all on one timeline.
Dude, totally.
Yeah. But then, of course, the problem in Flash is to run audio across scenes. So that was, if you're doing a music video, you've got to put them all in one scene in order to make and that was one of my early requests when I was on the Flash beta list, was to make audio stream across scenes, but never made it.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I remember early on, I figured out that if I exported out a PNG sequence and then compiled that in After Effects and then ultimately put that in Premiere, then I could treat it like like any other film clip, and that's kind of a pain in the ass to do, especially if like you're just doing everything on your own. But that really saved me. Like as soon as I started doing that, I didn't worry about like a Flash file corrupting because I broke every shot into its own Flash file, and that was like, oh, thank God that like I don't have to worry anymore.
Even with that workflow, doing everything in scenes and it being separate, I never, I should have done what you did, and that is make every scene its own Flash file, because something like Water Lollies, which goes for, I don't even know, it's like
4 minutes?
6 or 8 minutes.
8? Oh, wow, okay, yeah, a little bit longer.
It goes for like almost 9 minutes, I think. But
oh, damn.
I split that into 3 different Flash files because that was impossible to cope with. I mean, Flash found it impossible to cope with a file of that size.
I know
all the grass and the highlights on grass and trees, and
you start to change the scrubber, and it's like, I know Mike Welsh developed like that SWF to MOV, which a lot of people swear by. I know Hans talks about it, like it's his saving grace for a lot of his work. But it's cool how like people were so diehard about that art community that like it attracted a lot of really technical people to like no, we're gonna figure this out so the artists can keep like making a mess, and then hopefully it still works out for them. You know what I mean? Like
that swivel was a godsend. I used to use a program, and it cost money. Like it cost like $20 or something back in the day, but it was called SWF to Video Pro. And it was just this little app that did exactly that. It recorded your Flash frame by frame and compiled it into a video or an image sequence with all your filters and camera moves and action script intact. So,
nice.
Swarms on screen and stuff. So then that guy, whoever made that, just kind of like dropped off the radar and was still taking money, of course, but but there was no updates to the program, and so when Swivel came along, it was like, this is what everyone needs. This changes everything. It allows you to put your Flash on. Mike's
a genius. He's so good at all that stuff. I was going to ask you for Brackenwood, because here's my perspective. I was out in, I think, Round Rock, Texas, and I find the Brackenwood series, and I noticed it's very Tolkien-esque, and it's sort of set in like this fantasy world, and it's a lot of bush, right? It's a lot of like outdoorsy stuff. And then I see, Adam Phillips, this guy's from Australia, and I can't help in my 15-year-old brain, I'm like, oh, that's probably because he lives in an actual wilderness, you know what I mean? But so yeah, I want to ask you like actual inspiration. Did you get it from anywhere, or was there a movie or were you living out in the wilderness like I was imagining?
A couple of times I've been asked this question, like, you must live in this really lush forest, but it's the opposite. I lived in a dust bowl. Really boring small country town. I figured now that I have a better understanding of the Australia, I'm like, well, that obviously is probably just desert. Like exactly, yeah. It's where I wanted to live. It was my idyllic paradise. You know, Brackenwood was like, what would I like to see walking through the wilderness? I'd like to see these rolling green hills and lush grass and water everywhere and strange creatures, and you know, I wanted to be there, and it's one of the nice parts of getting feedback about that sort of stuff when people say, I want to be in this place. It's like James Cameron's when he made Avatar, and then people had, I don't know if you heard, they had like post Pandora's depression syndrome, where people walked out of that movie and they're like, I'm so sad because I want to be back in that world. In that world, yeah. It's funny you should mention that in the same breath as Brackenwood, because usually when we talk about Brackenwood and then Avatar, it's because someone has noticed that those little things that float through the air in Avatar are, some people suggest, maybe someone who designed creatures on Avatar was a Water Lilies fan, was a Littlefoot fan. Completely, man. Yeah. I see stuff spring up every now and then. I scratch my head. I'm like, I wonder if they saw the same, internet, whatever. Like, yeah. But they're all guys like us who if you've got a job and you've got to create something, and you take your inspiration from somewhere. I'm not saying that whoever created these creatures in Avatar was a Newgrounds, but they could have been. But the other thing is, these things happen on other sides of the world at the same time, and they could be identical. Like when I made the UU and that black smoky cloud, I showed some people at work. I showed Bernard actually, and he said, "Oh, it looks like the smoke, the Lost monster," and I went, "What? Lost?" Because the Lost TV show, and he'd been watching that, and I hadn't, I wasn't watching it, but I said, "Oh, how similar is it?" And he said, "It's identical," and I went, "Oh, I was devastated." Oh man, that's such a thing that a lot of artists, especially on Newgrounds, because it was a sort of a friendly competition, but we'd always sort of panic that it's like, oh, I hope so and so doesn't think that I copied this idea, and then sometimes you'd be like, "Hey, fuck you, dude! Like, I saw what you did with my thing." You write a really mean review. Like, like it's almost like I hear stories about like stand-up comedians, and they do the same thing, or it's like, "Oh, you're stealing my jokes." It was the exact same drama. It felt like back on the Newgrounds days with all that stuff. I guess if you think you've come up with a good idea, you don't know where that idea's come from either. You might, if two people come up with the same thing, and one person says, "You ripped that off from me," who's to say that original person didn't get inspiration from somewhere else? So it's just like be inspired and share the ideas. And I'm at that place now where it's almost subconsciously, I know that I've probably done stuff that I'm drawing from so many places, and but I guess that's the important thing, as long as it's not like willful and you're like, oh, I'm going to take this specific thing and then rearrange it and make it my own now or whatever. So, I've always been kind of, I've been okay with that. Like back on Newgrounds, I would sight lock all my stuff with ActionScript because I was terrified that, Ebaum's World was going to like take it and play it or something. Ebaum's World, oh my God. Yeah, or what was the other? There was a couple of other Flash portals where they would just rip stuff off Newgrounds and put it on. So I would try and sight lock all my... I think there was one called Flash Portal. I think it was like flashportal.com or .net or something. But anyway, right. Yeah, and I still see the logo. It was the Flash logo. So everything's... I don't want to say everything's ripped off, but that's the kind of stuff that I was trying to mitigate against by sight locking all my stuff. And of course that came back to bite me, because when I had to export all my, with Swivel, the sight lock code would would lock up the SWF and I couldn't play it locally, and therefore I couldn't convert it to video and put it,
Oh no.
on my site as video, or on YouTube or whatever. So that came back to bite me, site locking all my stuff, and there's a whole bunch of stuff of mine that's now gone because of site locking.
Oh damn.
So, but otherwise I was okay with people. I mean, later on I was okay with people either using my stuff as inspiration or posting it on. Like, there's so many versions of Brackenwood movies on YouTube that other people have uploaded, and in fact, if I didn't have it on my website, I would embed their copy on my website.
That's so funny.
So yeah, and if someone says, "Oh, I really like your character, can I make a D&D campaign with him?" It's like, yeah, sure, just don't sell a t-shirt.
Sure. Yeah. Or give me some of that, nuts. Profit if you do.
Yeah. Just give me a t-shirt.
I was gonna ask you. I remember back because you were talking about. It seemed like Macromedia, I guess, was talking to specific people about testing out their software and sort of trying to make it better. Because I remember there's a period. It was kind of on the cusp of Newgrounds and maybe a little bit before that, but it felt like every time you saw like a Shockwave or an SWF online, it was pretty artful and it was pretty unique. And it felt like, I remember, I think it was like the Mr. Man show, and a lot of just really unique, weird, quirky creators out there that were making stuff before, I guess, it became a hit critical mass or whatever. But I don't know if you knew much about what Macromedia was doing with that art community or whatever, like if they were,
Yeah, when I started using it at Flash 5.
Okay.
So that was Macromedia for another 2 versions until Adobe came in at Flash 8. It was Macromedia Flash MX 2004. That was still Macromedia, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So 2004 was version 7. So I started using it at Flash 5. And a friend of mine at work, another animator who was getting into Flash, his name was Kevin Peaty, and he did he had a website like me and Bernard. We all had our websites and we'd all swap ideas. But he actually was contacted by Friends of Ed, who was a book publisher, and said, "Do you want to write about how to make Flash movies? Because we've seen your stuff online." He actually personally knew the guy who made the Mr. Man show. And one thing I remember Kevin saying was that the reason he loves this Mr. Man stuff is because it doesn't look like a Flash movie. It looks like stuff that hasn't been done, that isn't done in Flash. And so I wanted to make movies that didn't look like they were made in Flash.
Dude, well, mission accomplished, because we all didn't like I said, we didn't realize that Flash could do that when we saw Brackenwood stuff. We were like, what have we been doing this whole time? But yeah. I wanted to do everything that I could do in the studio. I remember pitching to the general manager of the studio, we should be using Toon Boom to do our animation digitally because it's so quick. And he said, all right, do a test for me. Submit a kind of pitch. So I sat there for about an hour. It was the first time I'd used Toon Boom as an animation program for any proper scene, but I did a water splash because I was running the effects department at the time, and fully animated, cleaned up in between, colored and treated, and then showed him the video. And he said, "Oh yeah, that's great. I'll get back to you." And of course, nothing changed. There was, but I did the work of what, animation cleanup in between digital ink and paint and compositing. I did all that work in about an hour, and a scene like that would probably take a couple of weeks to go through the studio. So it made a lot of sense to me back then to transition to digital and use digital tools. But I knew back then that this is software that could be as good doing animation as traditional was. And so when I made Flash movies, I wanted to do stuff that didn't look like it was made in a web animation app. It looked like it was made in a studio. It's funny how sort of when a house style is set, even if it's not inside of a studio, that people think that's just the way it works, and you're supposed to use fucking gradients every time you flood fill, and like that sort of becomes the standard. But yeah, it's always cool when you need to have that sort of mold breaking, right? If you want to keep pushing stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see from the time that people on Newgrounds started seeing Flash as a more serious, it wasn't gradients and sliding text and primary colors. It was, you could do so much with it, and it's good to see that moment in Newgrounds history where it exploded creatively and people were doing really cool frame by frame stuff and lighting, and I think there was a user, Comlock, he was a member of my forum, but on Newgrounds he was making Flash movies that had an overlaid, slightly blurred, the same, he would duplicate the scene, lay it over the top, reduce its opacity down to like 15% or something, and slightly blur it, so it gave everything this soft lens quality. It was just brilliant to see someone playing with, a style and making some really cool. And the reason I remember him, not only because he was on the Brackenwood forum, but he did a couple of Brackenwood tribute things, like a Brackenwood Christmas thing, and
That's cool. No, I love the hacks, right? That kind of stuff. That it felt like, Flash was such a simple program. Relatively speaking, that people would sort of find little. Even with the mask, I remember you could like mess with like I forgot. I used to mess with that stuff all the time. But yeah, you'd find little hacks and little shortcuts that the people who made the software never intended it to do that. But then you would break it and it would do what you wanted to do. So
exactly. Yeah. And I remember I was always requesting. It's like going back to your early question, which I didn't realize I answered, but I realized I didn't answer, was whether or not Macromedia did work.
Correct.
Did any testing, but I was doing testing for Macromedia on their software. I think they got in touch and said, "We've seen your stuff on Newgrounds," and it was because I had also been on the Macromedia forums and submitting feature requests and stuff like that, and things like coming back to what we were just talking about is some of the feature requests. One of the big ones for me was inverted masking. Because if you wanted to mask out something, if you wanted to have Bitey cut off by water, you had to draw the bit that wasn't cut off. You had to draw the bit that was you had to mask the bit that was above the water. So his legs in the water were visible in the scene.
Right. That was a head trip. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And I realized. I heard later on towards the end of my time with Flash that, there's a way to do it with blend modes and using the erase or the alpha blend mode. And then you could blur those because blend modes could only be done in movie clips. So movie clips, you can blur them and add a blend mode. So you could totally make an inverted mask and all that. And I didn't know anything about that because I'd never touched blend modes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so lots of little tricks and cool things that...
So I know we were talking about before we started recording that you did come out here for Comic-Con back in 2010, right? Was that the first time that you got to run into the community? I'm guessing Tom was there and everybody?
Yeah. I found the booth and I went up and introduced myself to Tom, and Dan was signing stuff. Dan Paladin was signing stuff, and I asked him to sign. He said, "Who should I make it out for?" I said, "Adam." And then
and he heard the accent and he was like, "Oh my God, I know who you are."
And he drew a picture of Bitey for me.
He's another guy who was great at effects. I always loved his explosions, his little cloud effects. I thought were super cool.
Yeah, really cool. And liquid effects and anything dissipating, his explosions and dust effects and everything. You can see it all through his work in Castle Crashes and stuff, and it's so him.
It's crazy. He does. It sounds like he does the majority of that stuff. Like he's just a workhorse, just sitting there doing a lot of it.
Yeah. I did hear something that I think it might have been on his own Twitter actually a while back. Does he tweet anymore?
Dude, I maybe not, because I haven't noticed if.
Yeah, me either. But I remember seeing something. I might have been on Facebook actually a while back, like years ago. But there was a photo of someone else's desk at the Behemoth, and it was covered in Dan's sticky notes. So Dan was like, do this, do that, make it look like this and do that. And just like, I get the impression, because I don't really know, but I get the impression he is so hands-on and does everything with the art. Yeah. And doesn't, It
makes sense. I mean, it completely oozes. Like everything he does, it's like, that is Dan Paladin. Like you can't.
There's no holes in it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah, that must have been fun. I mean, I remember. I think it was 2009 or 8 when I finally met the Newgrounds guys, and I don't know about you, but for me that was a really I don't know. It just felt like there wasn't any sort of awkwardness. It's like we've known each other for so long, and then we just kind of slid right into this. I mean, granted, everybody from Newgrounds was kind of a weirdo as it was,
introvert.
But I don't know. It's just like I remember Tom had a party. He rented out the space next to the main Comic-Con area, and it felt like a home, I guess. It's just very, very easy to talk to people, and I don't know. It was a good feeling.
And I was always worried about going to those things. I thought, well, if I go there, I'm going to meet someone who hates my work.
Oh my God, dude. So I remember a little awkwardness did happen. It wasn't that Comic-Con, it was on a Pico day, and I forget who the guy was. Poor guy, but he had this just scowl on his face, and apparently I had written a not so stellar review years ago on one of his cartoons. God. And I just didn't know I didn't understand what was happening at the time. I found out after the fact why he was murdering me with his eyeballs. But,
the poor bugger.
Dude, but I must have just been, I must have been like a 16-year-old kid who was just like, that's dumb, whatever.
Yeah, I remember one of the last responses I wrote to a troll or someone who was like, let me have it about my work, this shit. I think one of my last responses to that kind of thing was, come back in 10 years when you're not a bitch. And no, come back in 10 years and see what a bitch you are.
Oh my God.
See what a bitch you were, or something like that. This poor kid who
you'll thank me later.
Yeah, we all do that, right? You go back onto the internet and you say, oh, I said that. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You grow up and you regret the shit that you said.
At the same time, though, I think it's also, I don't know. I mean, it's for me, though, I always figured like, well, you can't please everybody. So as long as you're batting a 95, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, it's fine. Like, there's gonna always be that one guy who's an asshole or super angry for whatever reason. Like, I mean,
well, it doesn't stop you from sorting by worst, right?
Yes. True.
Sort comments by lowest score, and you just read them and you go, oh, well, I've only got 6 really bad comments and hundreds of good ones, so let's just sort by best again.
Well, the ones that are really cutting are the ones that give you like a 7 out of 10, and they go like, it was really, really good, but let me like embellish this one thing that could have been way better, and you're like, damn it, you're right. But those are actually, I think, in the long run, good, because they are being really
that's
critical,
constructive
right?
criticism.
Yeah. But those are the ones that like you kind of feel high and mighty for like the first day, and you're like, yeah, I got a daily front page, whatever, and then like you start to see the really real critical reviews. You're like, you know what?
Yeah, that guy knows.
I gotta think about that one.
You improve because of that, and that's what comments are there for, and they're the ones you should read.
Right.
You can stroke your own ego by sorting by best.
Right.
Or you can bring yourself down sorting by worst, or you can just go and look at the middle and get some education.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Tom's always been so generous. Like, I feel like he's, I don't know, I think that's what's great about the Newgrounds community versus obviously the YouTube shit is like there's an actual person curating, and it's not so robotic and I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a better place for animation, that goes without saying, but Tom's always been even though he's a tech guy, he always has had a good head for artful stuff, you know what I mean? Which I can always appreciate about that guy. Like,
yeah, he's incredible. Like the support that I got from him, even just, you know, almost emotional support that I got from him. Like, you know, because we do it because we want to impress people. We do it because we want to read the good feedback, and we want people to be blown away and to be inspired by your stuff, and to get your name out there. And I don't think any of us or many of us do it for the exposure or the money initially. Like, not on Newgrounds anyway. We're getting...
There was no way to make money with monetization before, you know, this ad stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you start getting, you know, this guy who runs the website, you know, you think people like that are untouchable. You can't reach them by email. You can't talk to them because they're famous. You know, but Tom is so down to earth and easy to talk to, and he'll reach out if he hasn't heard from you in a while and ask how things are going. And you know, I heard from him a few weeks ago just about some new stuff in the works. It's really good to know that it's still run by, you know, he didn't sell out for $2 billion to Google, or, you know, I don't know.
I remember
that opportunity ever.
I remember he was having a serious consideration where he was talking about, and he made a big public post about it, saying like, I'm really wondering if I should bring in angel investors. The only problem is that would compromise the way I run my own business. And I remember a lot of people were really worried that he was going to end up going that way. But yeah, thankfully, like, he still is in control of everything. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I wonder how much of a sacrifice. I mean, I haven't spoken to him personally, but how much he might have sacrificed that none of us can really appreciate. You know, if he did decide to sell out, could, you know, it just not be, you know, a struggle to you know, compete, or, you know, because I remember you know, back when he cleaned up the site to, you know, took out all the mature ads, and you made it so that every school in the country didn't block Newgrounds by default. Right. And, you know, that kind of thing, cleaning up the site, that was you know, that must have taken a hit, you know. I'm pretty sure that's, you know.
No, I mean, that was a big source of traffic, and I think they still have a lot of that adult stuff, but I think it's sort of living on its own section of the website that's way harder to access. I know that they did an overhaul a couple of years ago with all that stuff, but yeah, I don't know at what state that's all at, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, Tom, I know every time they drop a video game, that goes a long way for them, and I know that there are people who are sort of really pushing for like the mobile version of Newgrounds and sort of like things that I think Tom, once Tom I think sometimes takes a little bit to get around to doing something, but there's so many people trying to support Newgrounds and pushing in a good way that I think there's good stuff on the horizon. At least that's the vibe I've been getting lately from even these kids who are like 18, 19 years old, and they're so hardcore still about Newgrounds. It makes me think, wow, there is a future for this place. It's not like everybody just jumped ship who is my age or older or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's but
cool. The great thing is when you hear about, you know, I used to watch your stuff when I was a kid, and now I've got kids of my own, and now they're fans of Bitey.
Yeah, dude.
It's like that generation will always be there, and if it's unique the way Newgrounds has always been, if it's that unique little spot that, you know, is perfect for kids like that, then that audience will always be there, and I think I think Tom sees that, and that's why Newgrounds is still Newgrounds and not just the next YouTube or the next Ibam's World. Yeah,
I know. I tell you, I get on there and I'm so blown away at the quality level that it's at now, and sort of just it's like, it's almost like the grandchildren, because, you know, everything moves so fast on the internet, but yeah, it's like this almost third generation of people now making mind-blowing stuff, and it's just incredible to see that it's still alive and still really vibrant. So it's pretty inspiring. Like, I don't know, it makes me want to I mean, we all have our own projects. I feel like a lot of people now who came from the early fun days are working on bigger, more meatier things. I know you're making a video game at the moment, right? Like, yeah,
it's I'm wondering, like with Newgrounds, if there's a mobile version, you wouldn't be able to play games on that, right? It would be basically a movies and art portal, right? And audio.
That's a fair question. That's a really fair question. I'm not the guy to ask for that, but I would imagine.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that you would probably halve the audience or something if there's no games on the mobile app.
Right. Yeah, and I know. I mean, it's HTML5 now, right? The stuff they used for the interactive stuff. I'm guessing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
They had the Unity player for a while too. Yeah. I don't know if they've still got it. But.
So who's taking care of? I'm assuming. Do you have like a help with the programming side of that? Or are you learning that yourself, or like?
Yeah, I'm collaborating with a guy that I worked briefly with at EA. In 2010. It was EA who actually flew me over there, and I said, "Oh, can I go to Comic-Con?" And they said, "Yeah, go to Comic-Con, and when you finished at Comic-Con, come down to Redwood City, which is in Silicon Valley area, somewhere there."
Uh-huh.
But there was a hotel there for me, and they set me up and had me working for 3 weeks on a Flash game called. It was a Flash. Facebook game. It was called Dragon Age Legends. So it was a spin-off of Dragon Age, being a mobile kind of a mobile experience of Dragon Age in the browser and mobile. Yeah, and eventually mobile. But and it became a Facebook game, and they had me in as a kind of art director. But not really, just the guy who came in and designed a few things, and then the art team took it. So, but he was a server engineer there at the time, and we kind of stayed in touch on Facebook and stuff. And then I cancelled my first attempt at a Brackenwood game, and that was with another programmer that I'd met through Newgrounds, and that first one was cancelled after a long, slow death, and it was all in Flash, and it was like getting to the point where technology was better than was now capable of so much more, and we were still using Flash, and I was just getting more and more discouraged, and he was getting more and more discouraged, and so eventually I just cancelled it, and I cancelled it in 2015, so it was for 5 years in development.
Oh my God.
In development hell, or not development.
Sure.
Before I decided to cancel it, but when I announced that on Facebook, this guy that I'd worked with at EA, he got in touch and said, "Hey, how about we work on this?" And that was at the end of at the end of 2016.
Okay, not too long ago, yeah.
Yeah, and so we started working. We announced it in just before the end of 2016. So we started work. No. We announced it at the beginning of 2017. Mm-hmm. So we've only been working on it for 18 months.
Wow. Okay.
And now we have a multiplayer. It went a different direction that I wanted it to, because being Brackenwood, the story of Bitey is one of abandonment and being the last of his kind and all that. And so when I announced we're making a game, everybody, and me included, assumed that it's going to be about the single player story.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, we decided that we don't know if we got an audience for this game. Do we work for 2 years on a single player story, release it, and have anything? Do we get anything back? Is it gonna be worth it? So
if it's just narrative based versus maybe more like a gameplay with multiplayer features and things.
Yeah, gameplay was kind of more important for Kirk. He's my collaborator, but for me, story was more important. So I wanted to stay true to the Brackenwood lore and all this sort of stuff. So I'm trying to figure out, and we decided that we need to get all the systems in place to make the single player anyway. Why don't we make something that's quicker to make, and that will be a multiplayer, and make it a kind of brawling ball game with everyone plays as Bitey, and so we decided to make a small multiplayer. Turned out that that's what we've been working on. For 6 to 8 months later, mm-hmm. we had a really kind of well fleshed out multiplayer game, and I still have trouble fitting that into the Brackenwood story. And so I decided that it's kind of a prequel or a memory or something like that, where Bitey is playing against versions of himself.
That's fun.
You know, or if it's a prequel, like in the past, the ancient ball game of Brackensack, and that's why Bitey has this innate kind of urge to kick the shit out of little creatures.
That's great. That's brilliant. No, he's prone to kicking little round things. That's great.
Yeah, and so he's presented with this ball. Actually, when the multiplayer first started coming together, we were kicking around Fatsack, this little creature. And there was 6 Bites all in a little field kicking the shit out of this poor little creature. And I thought, this isn't funny. This is cruel. The good thing about the movies is that Bitey kicks these creatures around and teases them, and he's a little asshole. But
it's retribution.
Then he gets retribution, exactly. But that wasn't happening in the multiplayer. There's no retribution. So I changed the fat sack into a ball now. So,
it's funny. I was pulling up your stuff just to kind of refresh my memory from, not that I hadn't seen him a gajillion times back when I was 15, but I brought it up, and I was sitting in a room with a friend who hadn't seen any Brackenwood stuff. And I was like, this will be interesting to see a Flash animation that's, I guess, maybe at this point, 12 years old or even more than that. Like, this is 2004 maybe.
Yeah, the last one was 2009, so that's nearly 10 years old.
Yeah,
the most recent one.
Okay, so over 10 years old, to see how that would kind of hold up, and you'll be happy to know that because they started asking questions about the world, and they were like, oh, that little character does this, or what? I wonder what their problem is. Oh, it looks like they're friends already, like the witch and the big hairy guy. So it wasn't. So all that to say that they were invested in what was happening in terms of the characters. Yeah. So I was like, oh, good. Yeah, it's still, to somebody who's brand new to this, 2018, they're still getting a kick out of this stuff. So,
well, Bitey of Brackenwood, that movie that you're talking about with the witch and that other character, that's 15 years old now.
Okay, yeah. That was the first one, right? Or no?
That was the first one that was Bitey's first movie that I put on Newgrounds. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because that's at least the first one. That makes sense, because that's the first one I ran into back in the day. Yeah.
And then I just started, improving on everything from there, like putting in camera moves. Like Prowley's at the River was the next one, and I was like doing that camera movement through the trees, and having him jump, and being inspired by other animation that uses floating camera, like Tarzan and the Disney's feature Tarzan.
Do you have a notebook of sort of fleshed out characters, or sometimes artists keep track of that stuff, like in a little world journal or something? Anything like that?
I released a little print-on-demand book. It's on Amazon, Brackenwood character sketchbook.
Oh, great!
It just documents actually, I've got it here somewhere.
Oh, great! Yeah, let's plug that shit, dude.
Well, it's like really, it's really
nice. Dude, that's slick.
Inexpensive. Little tiny book, but it's just full of
Oh, that's slick, dude. That's cool.
Yeah, just lots, and a little character intro for each thing. But yeah, I just did that as a kind of to document the progress of the progress of the characters over the years, and even the ones that aren't in there anymore. They're in that book, and it's just got a little thing saying he's no longer in the series, and because Bitey, it became all about Bitey. So, right. But yeah, I never really did that kind of thing for the money. In fact, I did that for the Kickstarter for the first Flash game, which was successful, and I delivered as many rewards as I could after that was successful, and that book was one of them.
Oh, great.
And then once we canceled the game, I just put a message on the Kickstarter and said, I'm sending out refunds to anybody who wants them, and anybody who didn't get this particular reward, contact me for refund and all that. And that was a big turning point for me, where I thought, I think Brackenwood's dead, and I'm going to have to go back to working for studios. And I contemplated briefly doing a movie about by being killed, or
oh no,
his bones being found or something.
No.
or Brackenwood just slowly being enveloped by this darkness.
Oh my god, dude! I would have cried. I would have been bawling.
Excellent. That's what I want. That emotional response.
I would have given you a 3. I would be like, "What is this,
you bastard?" Yeah, and I would have seen that too.
No, I kid, but no, that's great. Well, dude, that's exciting that somebody that you're now like on your way, and it sounds like you guys got something that's, which it's funny because recently on Twitter I've been seeing a lot of like nerds fighting about gameplay versus story, and I think you guys are doing the right thing because getting somebody addicted to something that's fun to play, I think is really solid. And like you said, it sounds like you're constructing a cool little narrative anyways as it is around it.
Yeah, a little excuse for there to be more than one bitey. But the other thing is that now that the multiplayer's out there and people can buy it and people are playing it, and it's dedicated servers and stuff, I'm now working on the single player stuff. So I'm now doing a story mode, which is what I'll be working on for the next couple of months.
That's great, man.
So yeah, we've got all the systems in place. We've got all the character animation. We've got all the world building and stuff. And I've learned to use all the software along the way. So now I'm in a better position to make the single player than I would have been back, 18 months ago.
Have you played? Now I'm thinking about story-based games. Have you played the game Inside? I think it's called.
Oh yeah.
That's
amazing. You know what I love most about that game? As great as an experience as it was, the thing I really love is there's no instructions. You just play, and you learn to play, and 5 hours later you just go, oh my god, that was just so fulfilling.
Seamless, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't even think there's UI in that game, right? I think it's just one.
I don't know.
big...
I'm gonna have to go back and play it and see if there actually is, because there's later on, I don't want to spoil anything, but later on when there's other things you have to do, you just figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's real respect for the player.
Right.
Like, kudos to the developers, because they really respect their player. They don't hit you over the head with instructions or narrative or anything. And that's not a bad thing, is to have instructions and stuff, but being able to let the player figure out how to do stuff is
those are the best games. I mean, I feel if I remember correctly, I think the first Half-Life had that element where it's like the game subtly teaches you how stuff works, and then it kind of ups the ante, and all of a sudden, hopefully, if you've been paying attention, it kind of rewards people for paying attention, and that's, I think, the best kind of entertainment is that way, where it doesn't clock you over the head with the information, but for those who are really appreciating it, they get rewarded, which I think is
and you feel
cool.
much better about something when you figure it out, not when you're being told. It's like we like to play the game without someone telling you what to do.
Right. Yeah.
Over your shoulder in the same room. But Inside was incredible that way. And
I heard they processed the audio through a human skull. They somehow you'll have to look it up, but I think they filtered the audio to resonate through an actual, I don't know if it was a human skull, but it was definitely like some sort of bone structure, and it gave it that weird sort of muffled yet vibraty sort of like creepy feel.
God, who thinks of this stuff though? Like,
I don't know.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like a cool thing to say in your post-mortem, isn't it? It's like
completely.
We got your GDC talk.
We went to a grave and dug up a body just for this game.
Yeah, just for this game. Thank you, GDC. See you next year.
Well, hey, listen, man. Before we run out of literal
tape,
I have some questions from the patrons from the Shot Talk Patreon. So I wanted to get to those real fast to make sure that they're all taken care of. So first question here is we have, could you ask him what unique challenges he faced making video game versus an animated short? And this is from a guy whose username is Spastic Chihuahua, but it's not.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Spastic Chihuahua. I recognize that name from my Twitch.
Okay.
So because we've been developing the game live on Twitch every weekend. So
perfect.
Every step of the way is documented and recorded. But Spastic Chihuahua. I recognize the name. So the question was, the challenges.
Yes, unique challenges that you're finding. I feel like you talked a little bit about it, but like what's unique to making a video game that's challenging versus making an animated short?
Well, the thing that Kirk and I have butted heads a bit over this, and that is the video game, we can't just have Bitey be able to do something without there be an explanation for it. For me, story is most important. For him, gameplay is most important. So if he says, oh, let's have Fat Sack, you can throw Fat Sack and he explodes. And, Morrigs, the big giant hairy guys, that's your bomb. Is throwing Fat Sacks, and I can't do that in Brackenwood, and it's not that it's not that silly. These some of these suggestions, but there are things that I'm inflexible on because it's Brackenwood, and I'm not gonna do I'm not gonna have aeroplanes or motorbikes, and I'm not gonna have bombs or
right.
Even something like fire is a bit of a should I have fire in Brackenwood, and it's like it's just every single thing has to be. Has to have has to fit into the Brackenwood universe. So story is probably the most difficult thing. But when it comes to the animation, I actually find the animation for making game a bit easier than. I mentioned this in another thing recently, but making animation for games is you animate a state of a character, so an idle pose. And the kind of rolling shoulder animation for idle, and then just a run cycle. And you don't have to hook that up into a performance like you do in animation, which is kind of, you tend to think of animation in television and film as a scene. So you've got to do a complete scene where the character might be acting, they might be doing stuff, and there might be chaotic action or whatever, but in a game, it's just a single state, and you can gauge your progress at the end of the day by how many states you've done. Whereas in animation, you gauge your progress maybe over days or weeks on this one scene. So it's more small milestones that make it a bit easier to work in games.
That's cool. Yeah, it's more like a quicker checklist or a more
exactly
detailed checklist, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think, I like that you're preserving the lore but I think sometimes the best stuff comes when two people with strong convictions have to work together, and then what results from that is usually really cool.
Yeah.
So let me see. So we got next question coming from Sonjira. This person who, I can't tell if Sonjira is a girl or a guy, but it says, out of your whole career, was there any particular thing you animated that stood out to you as particularly challenging or hard to execute, and what did you learn from it?
The one that comes to mind immediately from my professional career was a shattering window scene in a Beauty and the Beast Christmas movie. I was, I was a senior effects animator at the time, and it was just this shot of a window, and the bad guy Forte, the pipe organ, turns evil and starts destroying the castle or whatever. At one point, the window shatters, so there's just a shot of the window that's just being blasted, and the glass. I animated that traditionally, frame by frame, every piece of glass and stuff. And it's still on, I think I linked it on YouTube. I found it on YouTube. And that scene took me probably a couple of weeks. Yeah. And it taught me patience, because you can sit there and just get more and more miserable at every line you draw. And it's just so much glass flying through the air. And I'm animating each individual shard. I think it was on singles because there was a camera shake or something, but I was animating each individual shard going through, and there were hundreds of shards, and that's why it took me a couple of weeks, and the scene is like less than a second long. But that taught me that it doesn't really matter how long you spend doing it, as long as you've got life in your body and your arm works. You finish this scene, at the end you got something amazing that by today's standards, you'd use particles for that. You wouldn't, and I do use particles as much as I can, because if I don't have 2 weeks to do a scene and frame by frame animate something, software today makes it easier, but that kind of thing taught me that it'll get done and it'll look great if you just stick with it.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's cool, man. Let's see, and then looks like we got one more from Ninja Muffin 99. They ask, what was one of the more difficult challenges that came up while making the Dashkin game, be it either technical or creative / game design wise? So
is that the end of the
it's
question?
yeah. So it goes. Let me read it again. What was one of the most difficult challenges that came up while making the Dashkin game, be it either technical or creative / game design wise?
Yeah. Well, the big thing there is that I have never designed a game. I've never designed a game and seen it through to the end. So the first one, I mean, I'm a fairly naive game designer in that I'm making something that I want to play, but I don't really have an overall view of it. So as a animator and someone who makes short films, I have a beginning and an end, and that I can envision, and then I'll start doing the scenes and laying it out, and then do it scene by scene. In game design, which even experienced game designers, veterans, will tell you that. I think Rami Ismail from Vlambeer says that nobody knows what they're doing. None of us have. It never turns out the way you want it, and so game design is a real kind of difficult thing to formulate and to see from one end to the other and have a strong vision turn out the way that you envision it in the beginning.
To begin with,
never happens like that. But for me, never having that experience at all, like I feel like such an imposter saying that I'm developing a game. Like I don't feel comfortable saying that I'm a game developer, and I certainly don't feel comfortable saying that I've designed a game. So it's, for me, the game design thing is the challenge. Is I'm learning as I go, and it's my first game. I feel embarrassed to release this, and for someone like Ed McMillan might see it. And for me to think, well, he's going to laugh, and I might. But with the animation side of things, or with the art and creative side of things and technical, there is a gap between me and Kirk. The gap is technical art, because he's very technical and I'm very artistic. There's a gap that is necessary. There's a role that's necessary in game development called technical art, and that is. Materials and lighting and UI and hooking stuff up with code so that it works and comes up as graphics in the game. I don't have any of that experience, and Kirk has had to fill that role, and I've had to try and learn as much as I can about that role as well. So we're still kind of got this fuzzy gap where some of the stuff is unpolished because neither of us have either the time or the experience to fill that up. That's been a huge challenge. Having said that, the amount of stuff that I've learned over the past 18 months in the realm of 3D, I know now how to make a level in Unreal by sculpting terrain and putting foliage on it and making the foliage look 2D, and sculpting stuff in ZBrush, retopologizing it in Maya, and then unwrapping it and then putting it in a substance and giving it a material, and then going back into Unreal and lighting it and everything and hooking all that up. I never could have thought I would be able to do that, and now I can. Not very well. I'm not a master, but I can do it.
It's amazing how I think a lot of artists or technicians, it's not until you're kind of thrown into the fire and you go, oh wow, I had no idea I had that in me. But it's sometimes it's just a matter of being thrown into the deep end and just hoping that it works out. I will say though, I mean, as much as you may feel that that maybe you imposter syndrome or whatever, I do think also that it is a trait of somebody who's trying to keep an open mind and sort of be willing to learn. And so if it's any consolation, I think that's a good sign that you're not declaring that you're the Grandmaster Miyamoto or whatever. So yeah. Because generally the best guys are like that. Like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've got something that I like to play, and that's great. And I'm working on this single player stuff. I'm now in my element. I want to tell a story through these new skills that I've got. And I'm really looking forward to that. And that's like 3 months. The next 3 months of work is going to be just telling the story through gameplay with our existing gameplay systems. So, would you ever
after this chapter is over, would you ever consider like a feature length Bidey of Brackenwood situation, or any sort of treatment for that?
Yeah, I mean, I started collaborating with a friend from the Disney days, another friend of mine who's now he's freelance at the moment actually, but he did a lot of story artwork on the Guardians. What was the Guardians movie with Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny?
Oh, right. That's actually the last film I was on before. Before I was like, I'm done with this place.
Yeah, he used to work. His name was Ryan O'Loughlin. Do you know him?
I knew a Ryan who was in Story. I'll have to.
That's him.
I'll have to see if it was the same guy. But
yeah, he's an Australian guy.
Okay.
And he now lives in LA. He and Bernard both. They were really close friends as well. So we had this kind of trio of. Well, there were like 5 of us who were into, we would all. We'd all hang out and look at each other's movies and stuff. But yeah, Ryan's a really good friend. So yeah, the reason I was mentioning him is that we started working on a Brackenwood feature film together.
Oh, great.
So a lot of the story that we put together, because I had this big idea of the story, and of course it was, once again, naive as hell. And at the end of me pitching it to him, he said, well, Bidey doesn't do anything. I was like, shit, you're right. So he helped me craft it into something where there really is a real threat to Brackenwood in the UU, which is the black cloud creatures. And Bidey has to have a role, and from there we crafted this we started to develop this kind of story. It's really like me keeping it Brackenwood and the way I want to tell the story, and him guiding me on how to tell a good story. So I'm lucky to have friends who are really proper film, they've got a proper head for film and story structure, and so that feature film stuff, there's not going to be anywhere near enough time in the game to tell. There's not really going to be much new story in the game, because it's so big that I just got to pick a small snippet that's going to be interesting and say we'll tell that in the game, and then maybe later on we can release updates or make another game, or I could just make a movie or a web comic or anything else, and more Newgrounds movies and more animation that tells more story, because there's plenty of it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's to me it's exciting to know that in your head that there's still more to tell, and that it's just finding the right format for that, which is pretty cool.
There's stuff that nobody knows, and if I die, nobody will ever know it.
Oh no, you're like
even Ryan. So yeah, and sometimes I think, well, in order to do this in the game, I have to tell Kirk, the engineer, I have to tell him what the story is. So I'm like, how much can I not tell him? How much should I just? Can I get away with not telling? So I'm always one of these secretive kind of story.
You should physically write it out and hide it somewhere, and then have a map, left for whoever's still alive, so they can hunt it down.
A big W.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have it all written And I've thought about, because I had heart surgery back in like 2011, and I thought, should I write an email before I go into surgery? Should I write an email that is set to send in 2 weeks, so that if I die, Jeanette, she gets the email with all the story.
Oh my God, dude.
So,
yeah.
So I've thought that, because if I die, I don't want it to die. So I've got it all written down. But
and obviously, you didn't send the email though. You went in either way. Oh my God.
I just thought, no one. If I die, then fuck it.
Fuck it. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, hey man, I think we're getting pretty close on running time here, but thank you so much for doing this. It was so cool to finally talk to you, face to face, in a certain light. And yeah, I think people get a kick out of this. I think there's a lot of folks who that was a big part of their up and coming on Newgrounds and Flash in general. So yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
Still today, there's an audience, so the people remember it, and that means the world to me.
Awesome, dude. All right. Yeah. Well.
All right.
Good talking, and that's it for Shot Talk for this week, and we'll see you guys next time.
If you'd like to see more of Adam's work, you can find him on Twitter @Clyde. Also, if you're enjoying this music, you can follow me at inexpensivejew.bandcamp.com. And finally, if you've enjoyed this episode of Shot Talk and would like to see more episodes in the future, please consider contributing to the Shot Talk Patreon. You can sign up today at patreon.com/shottalk. There are all types of rewards, like receiving episodes early, access to private Discord servers, and more. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.